A contemporary reading from John O'Donoghue's Beauty, the Invisible Embrace. The beauty of the earth is the first beauty. Millions of years before us, the earth lived in wild elegance. Landscape is the firstborn of creation. Sculpted with huge patience over millennia, landscape has enormous diversity of shape, presence, and memory. There is a poignancy in beholding the beauty of landscape. Often it feels as though it has been waiting for centuries for the recognition and witness of the human eye.
A place called home, with comfort for the weary. A place called home, of nourishment and rest. A place called home, that welcomes in the stranger, where one unknown becomes a welcome guest, where love can find a human habitation. God grant us all this grace, a place called home.
A place called home, where tenderness can flourish. A place called home, a haven from all harm. A place called home, where children sleep in safety, where hurts are healed, a shelter from the storm, where peace can find a human habitation. God grant us all this grace, a place called home.
A place called home, a promise for tomorrow. A place called home, a vision handed down. A place called home for all God's sons and daughters, where love prevails and peace is ever found, where hope can find a human habitation. God grant us all this grace, a place called home.
A place called this grace to build a place called home.
The Holy Gospel as it's recorded in Paul's letter to the Galatians. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. The Gospel of Christ. So I've been listening to conversations over the last few months, and one of the conversations that I've been hearing from folks is how difficult it is for us to expand our images of the divine. And part of that in conversation has come up, well, you know, all our lives we've had this one single image of the divine. And this is the image that we're comfortable with. This is the image that came to us. And yeah, during the time when we were bringing in inclusive language, we were able to expand those images to include feminine images for the divine. But this is the one that we grew up with, and we had years and years and years with this one. So it's really difficult to expand it. And when we start talking about the one in whom we live and move and have our being, well, that becomes difficult because we're still thinking about a personified being. And so it becomes, we're living through a time of transition where we're trying to expand our notion of the divine and understand it in ways that actually are ancient ways of understanding the divine. The one in whom we live and move and have our being comes to us from the book of the Acts of the Apostles. And it was a common understanding in ancient times that God was all-encompassing. And we sort of split that off and set God off up into the heavens. And creation, everything that's in the universe, became something that's separate from God. And yet, if we have this ancient understanding of the one in whom we live and move and have our being, well, how can that be? What's going on here? And so the question becomes, why even bother trying to understand the divine differently? And we've had years and years and years since we were children of thinking of God as a person. How are we going to move beyond that? And so it's a long weekend, it's kind of a laid-back time, so I want to read for you a children's book. Because it seems to me that if we're going to broaden and expand our images of the divine, we're going to have some resources at our disposal. So I want you to sit back and enjoy. I'm going to move over here and read this book, and you can just not have to be distracted by me, and it'll appear on the screen. But I wanted to use this book because I thought, what would happen if we didn't have an image of the old man in the sky given to us as the only image to think of the divine? I live in the city where the sidewalks and subway cars and buildings and buses are packed with people, but I've never seen God before. Grandma, does God live in the city? I asked one morning at breakfast. Yes, God is here, she says. You just need to know where to look. Whenever you see love, joy, and peace, God is there, she says, stirring her tea. Whenever there's patience, kindness, and goodness, God is there too. When you see faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's God's Spirit at work. On the way to school, I'm on the lookout. I see a bus full of tourists and count 10 bright yellow taxis. I spy a man sweeping a stoop, and Grandma and I laugh when we see a tiny dog wearing a fluffy purple sweater. At school, Grandma hands me my lunch and hugs me close before she says goodbye. Maybe that's what God looks like to me. Maybe God is like that too. On the swings, I pump so hard, I see over the wall into the alley. My friends shout, higher, higher, as my feet way up into the sky. They fly. That's what joy looks like to me. Maybe God is like that too. Outside, car horns blast and sirens scream, but my classroom is quiet and calm. That's what peace looks like to me. Maybe God is like that too. I try to tie my shoes, but the laces tangle around my fingers. My teacher sits down beside me and shows me how to tie them. That's what patience looks like to me. Maybe God is like that too. On the way home, I see a doorman wearing a red cape and a hat with a shiny brim. He's holding the door for a man using a wheelchair. The man moves very slowly, and the doorman chats with him and smiles. That's what kindness looks like to me. Maybe God is like that too. On the table for dinner, and at the door, we hear a knock. And our neighbor comes in with some bread. It's all warm and wrapped up in a towel. That's what goodness looks like to me. Maybe God is like that too. After dinner, I work on my homework while Grandma stands at the kitchen sink, washing dishes and humming to herself, just like she does every single night. That's what faithfulness looks like to me. Maybe God is like that too. At bedtime, Grandma sits at the edge of my bed, singing me a lullaby and stroking my head. She tucks my blankets up close around me. That's what gentleness looks like to me. Maybe God is like that too. I lie in bed watching the curtains flutter. I want to talk about that dog we saw today and how high I can swing, but Grandma says that once I'm tucked in, I have to stay in bed until morning. I close my eyes and try to fall asleep. That's what self-control looks like to me. Maybe God is like that too. I saw God over and over again today, whenever I saw love, joy, and peace, and whenever there was patience, kindness, and goodness. When I saw faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, I saw God's Spirit at work. I don't see God the way I see my friends or the streetlights or the river, but I see signs of God's Spirit all around me, right here in the city. I know what God is like. Maybe I can be like that too. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. The question becomes, why would we want to imagine God as anything other than a person? And I think that this notion of Paul's about what the fruits of the Spirit are gives us a bit of a clue. One of the things that I think is really, really difficult is for us, with all of our training and all of our baggage, is to understand that if the universe is in God, Now, don't think of this as the universe is God, but rather the universe rests in God. God is so much more than the universe, but the universe rests in God. Then that makes everything that we can see sacred. All of creation is sacred. And that has a different way of coming across when we notice creation, right? Before, when I showed you those landscapes, to give you an image, those landscapes have been there long before humans were ever created. And those landscapes may be there long after we are gone. But those landscapes are sacred, and we interact with those landscapes. And so this particular vision of a landscape shows a way in which we have interacted with the landscape because we don't have a sense of creation as sacred. God is up there in the heavens where paradise is. That's our old baggage coming across. It's not scriptural. But once we lodge the divine, the sacred, up there and away, it removes in our minds the sacredness of the landscape. And so we can do things like this. The tar sands. Would you do what we've done to the tar sands if you had a sense of the land as sacred? This is a shot of Lake Ontario. And the pollution in this shot is actually falling into the lake. Particles are falling into the lake. If we had a sense of everything in creation as sacred, how then do we respond to everyone who is also sacred? This was taken this past spring. Folks were coming up from the United States and into Canada. How would we greet folks as sacred? How would we respond to the pain of one another? All kinds of things in this one. You know, the fact that the water is allowed to be contaminated, and then that we do not do something about it, and then that our sisters and brothers who are also sacred as we are suffering, and we don't respond to that. When we fail to see one another as sacred beings and resort to tribalism, when we can't see the sacredness in those who are struggling. This is Canada Day weekend. We have troops on active duty in the Ukraine, in Latvia, and in Iraq. What's their mission there? How might that mission be impacted if we saw everyone as sacred, including those folks that we see as enemies? Would there be any need for aid agencies if we saw the entire creation as sacred? Sally McFaig tells us that the earth is God's body, and the church tells us that humanity is Christ's body, which says to me that we are all one. And if we are all one, why are we separated into tribes? And why are we not caring for everyone? We have the resources. So on this Canada Day, I would like us to celebrate something that I think this country does really, really well, and that's embrace diversity. But in celebrating that embrace of diversity, we need to understand that we have so much work to do. So much work to do. We are not yet caring for one another as if we are all one. And so when people say that, this is a theological problem or this is an intellectual problem, I'd like you to think about how the ways in which we envision the divine impact the ways in which we live our lives. So as long as God is separate from creation, we don't have to care for creation in quite the same way. But if the earth is actually part of God's body, and if we have to see the face of God in every person, how might we live upon the earth? I think that Christianity is uniquely placed because of the teachings of Jesus to walk the earth in a different way. And how will we know that we are doing things that way, the way that we are taught? Not only by Jesus, but in the Jewish wisdom tradition and in the wisdom traditions of the indigenous peoples of this land. The fruit of the Spirit, the actual fruit of what's working in us. Those fruits are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And these are the fruits by which we measure the way in which we are walking upon the earth.